What evidence either supports or refutes the idea that it is harder to get ahead today?
Well, there's been a number of studies done, or studies that I should say have been done over the last several decades that are now being reported on, looking at intergenerational mobility. And what that means is taking a person from the time that they're coming of age and coming into the workplace until the time that they have children, so about a 20-year period, and looking at whether they're doing better, worse, the same than their parents. And what those statistics show us is that America is falling behind, particularly in comparison to Europe, which I think is really interesting, because if we think again, to go back to the Statue of Liberty, to the generations before us, that's why people came to America. They thought it was going to be easier here.
One other important point that you make is that if you were born in 1970, in the bottom 1/5 of the socioeconomic ladder, you are far less likely to get ahead than you would have at one time.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if you were to be in that bottom quartile in the, say, the 50s, it would have been a lot easier to get ahead than it would be if you started out in the 70s and went till today. And I think that that reflects a kind of mega shift in our economy. The period of highest growth in most of our lifetimes was from the 50s to the 70s. It was the post-war era. Europe was rebuilding. America was surging ahead. There was a tremendous amount of consolidation, growth in American industry, but globalization hadn't really taken off yet.
Right.
Once you hit the 70s, and in particular the late 70s, you start getting a lot of other countries coming online. You know, you get the emerging markets, China, you get Eastern Europe, you get a little bit later on, you get the fall of the Soviet Union and all those countries coming in. And of course, people in those places want theirs as well, but then that means many billions of more people that we have to compete with.
Are people today better off or worse off than their parents?
Well, it's interesting. There's two ways to look at it. You can look at it in absolute figures, which a lot of economists will, to be fair, and then we have to say we're better off. We actually do have more money than our parents. We have many technologies that they didn't have. I mean, you know, look at our flat screen televisions and our snazzy refrigerators and things like that. But if you look at it in relative terms, a lot of people would say that we're not as well off, and I think relative is what matters, because as I write in the article, we don't peg ourselves to our parents, we peg ourselves to the Joneses.
Will you talk a little bit about the divide between the richest and the poorest in America today?
I'm going to refer to Coming Apart again because I do think it's a very interesting look. And this is someone he's on the right. I tend to think of myself more as a liberal, but I think that some interesting points are being made in that there's an entire cultural divide now between the upper middle class and the upper classes in this country and the working class in terms of education, which is the base of the pyramid. That's where it all starts, really, because education is, you know, as you know, is the #1 factor in terms of mobility. If you don't have that, your chances of getting up the ladder really are slim. So these people are more highly educated. Their lives are different. They tend to get married and stay married more than, say, a working class person would. No moral judgment on that, but what it does mean is they tend to be richer. You tend to be not operating with one income. You tend to have more stability. There's all different sorts of ways in which their lives are different. Their habits are different. Their political values are different. So we're really creating a bifurcated society here, and I do think that that's a risk for democracy.
What about the real estate market? How has that impacted things?
That's a huge missing link that I think people don't speak enough about. So, you know, there was a lot of talk during the Clinton administration and later in the book years of creating an opportunity society by allowing people to buy homes. And certainly while home ownership has been an important part of the American dream, as we all know, there were an unfortunate number of flawed mortgages given to people, often fraudulently on the part of the banks, who couldn't afford them. The government, in some cases knowingly, pushed these policy ideas out because they wanted this debt to cover up this long-term problem of the hollowing middle that has been happening since the late 1970s. Basically, since the 70s, wages in this country and every other rich country in the world have been flat. And we've been trying to hide that with debt, and we can't do it anymore.
This excerpt is brought to you by the Massachusetts School of Law, the leader of reform in legal education and a leader in multimedia education for the public. To view the full interview and for a full listing of MSL's programs, log on to mslaw.edu.